on radio in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050 WTKA, online at the Big1050.com. Sam Webb, Matt the Miz Mizler in for Ira Weintraub, and our MGoBlog crew, Sans one. No Brian Cook today, but we have Seth Fisher in the house. Seth, how are you?
We're talking Tigers.
Yeah,
we're talking a lot of Tigers. I'm loving it.
Buddha Craig Ross, his Cleveland is coming out this morning talking about.
They stink,
folks. He was telling us before we came live. He was like, the Tigers aren't going to keep Tarek Skubal. The Tigers aren't going to sign Tarek Skubal.
They're not. Mark my words.
Is that? How ridiculous is that? Tarek Skubal is, I think he's 27 right now, right, Miz? Isn't he 27?
I believe 28.
28. He's 28. There's no way they don't sign Tarek Skubal. I know what Scott Harris said. He was like, well, it's gotta make sense for both sides. It only makes sense to sign the best pitcher in baseball when he's 28 years old, no matter the price. It only makes sense.
Look,
they won't do it. They're too freaking cheap.
They did it for Verlander. And I know Scott Boras is their guy, and I know the Dodgers are probably looking at who's their next dude, and they're going to want to buy him off whatever they could ever cost.
Not going to happen.
And they're going to play him against each other, and it's going to cost a lot of money. But guess what? That's what Hall of Famers do. They cost you a lot of money. And then when you're done, is anybody mad that we paid Verlander? Like,
no.
Is anyone looking back on that?
No,
and going,
no one is mad
what?
at that, but it isn't coming out of the fans' pockets. And I'm happy for the Tigers. I'm a Gandhi's fan. I'm a Cleveland fan. I don't root for the freaking Tigers, but I appreciate what they've done, and I'm happy for their fans. They're my friends, but while the Cleveland and the Detroit organization, to their credit, is not as cheap as the Cleveland organization, which is pathetic, but they're still cheap. And I'm sorry to say that the best pitcher in baseball, I agree with you, Seth, will not be in Detroit after next year.
Here's what the Tigers are, man. The Tigers kind of sit below the surface. And
everyone's
just the Tigers. And then all of a sudden, they have these peaks, right? Like, all of a sudden, you get this 2006 where, like, boom, they zoom up to the top. And if you don't grab that World Series when you get a chance, you're going to miss it, right? If you don't get that 84, you have another shot. So you had 87, you have 88. You're going to have more opportunities. But you don't grab that.
They're below the surface like the Loch Ness Monster. I mean,
I love Craig Ross, and I don't want any reason to affect my love of Craig Ross. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I want to hear the Craig Ross story, so we can get off into talking about
real
college
stuff.
Sports and the future of college sports. So, what is our Craig Ross story to get things started? Well,
as you know, Sam, I'm a bad golfer. Maybe not as bad as you. I don't know, but I've just heard rumors about your golf. But my brother, one of my brothers, John, who's been on the show once or twice, he's a doctor, so he's a good golfer. And my other brother just goes when he's with us to heckle. And so we are down in wherever that was on the Gulf of Mexico last week with crappy internet. I'm sorry about that one. And we decide we're going to go golfing at the nearest course. So we drive a couple miles, and there's a shack. There's nothing that can tell you this is an actual golf course, but there's a shack. So we go down to the shack, and it says, please call this number if you want to play. So we call the number. A few minutes later, this woman comes out and says, who's playing? They have no carts. We got to walk this course. So it said, who's playing? I said, well, he and I, and this guy's coming, my other brother, Roger, he's just coming along to watch. She said, okay, $20. And I'll throw water in. All right. So she gives us some water. We pay the $20. She said, but you better wait a bit. And I said, why is that? well, I'm going to take the truck out. She has this like beat up little truck and over the course to shoo the alligators off. And I said, alligator? She said, don't worry, there, you know, I'll be in front of you and I'll make sure the alligators, you know, aren't a problem. So, and she also says, and if you hit a ball into the rough, don't go in there. I said, why is that? Snakes. There's a lot of snakes in the rough and alligators that wander around the fairway. We thought, what the heck, we'll try. So the first hole doesn't look that bad, even though the fairway's entirely weeds. There's nothing that looks vaguely like grass. We get to the green, and I'm not kidding you. The green consists of this brown substance, which I think is cow pies. It's like compressed cow pies on the green, the so-called green. By the time we get to the third hole, there's no fairway at all. It's just roots and sand. And dredging and this is a 95.
What golf course is this again?
Well, it sounds like it's something in the South. So does it surprise you?
Yeah, it's
down
very
in the
much.
Bayou, right?
It's definitely in
Is
the
this
bayou.
Florida? Because it sounds like a Florida man story about to pop up right now, Craig.
Well, they said they ran into a shack, so maybe he's talking about Shaquille O'Neal. Like that was
No, it was just a little shack. So anyway, we made it through about 10 holes, hauling clubs through 95-degree weather and being heckled by my brother Roger because you couldn't play on this course. I mean, you went into the weeds. If you did, was the best lie you'd have, but you were afraid of snakes and shit. Snakes and stuff. Excuse me, snakes and stuff in the weeds.
No, you probably were scared of crap, right?
Right. And we're wandering around looking for alligators on the course. So my advice, and this is irrelevant, I know, and there may be some allegory here with Michigan football. I'll try and think of it, but don't golf on courses in the bayou with alligators on the course. That's what I got to say. It just, there's no upside.
All right. So first of all, Miz, did you hit the dump button over there?
I did.
Okay.
Thank you.
We got that. I mean, not just the dump that apparently was on the golf course. So there's that. But everything's all good.
Clearly, all of their money in the Bayou is going to NIL, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not the golf courses. And we know they don't have enough NIL money to compete with Michigan based on how much money that they were trying to spend on golf. And clearly they did not have enough to keep those golf courses up before they started funneling it.
Well, the crazy thing is, Sam, the owner or the woman or whoever she was who came out to shoo the alligators off said that this was, quote, once one of the top 100 golf courses in the United States. Well, I pride myself on playing bad golf courses. This was
you were in Louisiana or Florida?
Florida. No, we were in Alabama.
Oh, you were in Alabama.
Okay.
On the Redneck Riviera or whatever they call it. So it was the worst course I ever played on. But maybe by Alabama standards, it was okay. I don't know. So anyway,
Well,
it's irrelevant, but you know, we don't got any Michigan sports going on.
well,
You know, LSU's got money again, man. They saved all that money they were going to spend on Bryce. They could probably give that back to the hospital or something now.
well, it's going to be interesting, man. It's going to be interesting to see how the money that they have to spend, how they're going to spend it NIL. You know, this clearinghouse. Ira and I have been talking about whether the clearinghouse will actually be of any use whatsoever. So as the rule reads, or as they talk about how it's going to be implemented, they say they're going to have these deals go through the clearinghouse and for approval. And if a deal isn't cleared, a player is still going to be able to move forward with the deal. And then the school is going to be subject after that to the approval of the school, subject to an approval process by the school and this committee this commission sometime after the fact, which begs the question, Seth and Craig, what's the clearinghouse? What are they clearing? What's the clearinghouse there for? If what they're clearing is not going to, if it's not going to be of any use, if they're going to,
they don't know. Here's their problem: is the legal problem. Maybe Craig can speak to this a little bit better. But my understanding is they have a major legal problem because you can't have a regulatory body that's not governmental saying whether a deal struck between two parties, money for services is worth anything, right? That's that's what they're trying to say is like, oh, if you want to do NIL deals, you really have to. It's not going to work legally. So that one of the things they have to do is get around that. Number two, there are a lot of schools who have a lot of power in the NCAA who are very interested in having rules that they don't have to follow, because they know some schools will follow those rules, and that gives them an advantage. And that was the system that they had in place for a very long time, and they're very much want that system back. And they have the ear of people who are creating these things, who feel like it's their duty to create something that looks like control, something that looks like the NCAA is not just letting everybody go and buy players willy-nilly. The fact is, though, without legislation, I don't think that they can. I don't they're just going to get sued again if they try to do anything real. And if they try to do anything fake, the only thing they might do is stop certain schools from participating, but it won't stop the other schools. But I think maybe that's like their goal right now. That's the only thing that they can get to, is have some sort of rules that not everyone has to follow, but allows them to strike at programs they don't like when they're mad at programs.
Yeah, I guess I would stop short of the clearinghouse, though, because this seems to be an exercise that's doomed from the start. I can see maybe trying to come up with the framework for the framework for a future where the student athletes have a say in the future of, determining what the rules look like. So they're coming up with this commission, right? And so we can get into the NCAA relinquishing its power as an enforcement arm. This is what we learned this week. So in case you missed it, according to reports, when the settlement agreement is made official, part of that settlement agreement is that the NCAA is going to turn over all enforcement power, except as those powers relate to academics. They will still enforce rule breaking violations of academic rules. But all other violations, enforcement of those rules will fall upon a new CEO, a yet to be named CEO, who they say will come from outside of intercollegiate athletics. They say it'll be a 7-figure salary, and it will be named by this commission, and this CEO will answer to the conference commissioners, the board of conference commissioners. I don't know how you guys feel about that. First, let's just start there. How do you feel about the notion of a CEO with unilateral power and to enforce rules, who answers to ultimately a board of conference commissioners?
Yeah, who's the CEO going to be? Mark D'Antonio, probably.
Outside of intercollegiate athletics, they say. I don't know if you buy that, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, the whole
Condi
thing.
Rice,
Condi Rice, yeah.
like who's going to take this job? Who's outside of collegiate athletics?
I mean, you're probably
you're
right.
not going to find anybody.
It's probably going to be Condi Rice. You probably got it right. And I mean, I think you got to start with one problem. I mean, as I'm reading this, there are states, I think Tennessee maybe has already passed it, that says the NCAA or whatever successor enforcing body may exist will not be allowed to enforce their rules or penalties against schools in the state of Tennessee. You got that. Conversely, the NCAA is saying, oh no, if you want to play for a conference in our conference, or if you want to play presumably any place under our auspices, these rules are irrelevant. You cannot enforce these state rules against us. Now there's a tension there, and I don't know how that tension plays out. But I'll tell you one thing: is going to get litigated, and that litigation is not going to be obvious or easy. And then you've got Deloitte. Apparently, what they want to use is Deloitte, the big accounting firm, to be the sort of if you want to call it clearinghouse or monitor of NIL deals, because there's two things going on. One is pay for play. Michigan, for example, has $20 or $22 million, which they can legally parse out among their athletes as pay for play money, as I get it. Then they can. That doesn't mean that individual athletes can't go out and do their individual NIL deals. That's what all this started from in the first place. So the classic one, of course, if I'm getting her name right, is Livy Munn at LSU,
Yeah.
who makes a fortune or done. Yeah, and so what I've heard or what's been written is that 70% of past deals, NIL deals within what are they called?
Would have been flagged. Yes.
With collectives. With collectives would have been said, nah, these are fake. This is fake. And this doesn't pass muster. 90% of all deals with corporations
would have been approved.
And so that's, I don't know where that comes from or who discerned that, but in any event, but let's say that's true. My guess is all of the ones that fall in the 10% or the 30% are going to involve litigation.
Yeah, but the 90% of the deals with corporations accounts for basically pennies, as opposed to the 70% of deals with collectives.
Okay, that I did not know
like
that.
Millions, right? So, which is why absolutely lawsuits. There will be a proliferation of lawsuits,
right?
Based on this, and why the clearinghouse will go down in flames.
Yeah. Well, the best thing that they can possibly get out of this is that certain schools will actually try to not have deal. And you're seeing this a little bit because teams are kind of scrambling right now to get their guys signed before this goes into place, so that they could have their, they want to have these deals in place right now and get your players now in case you actually have to follow these rules. The most they're going to get out of it, though, is going to be a temporary thing, just like all the other situations they've tried to create.
You just cannot. You're a lawyer, Craig. You cannot. And the lawyers in the house have to know that there is no way that this gets across the starting line without a flood of lawsuits. Because maybe if players hadn't tasted these deals, you would have had a trickle of lawsuits. But because they've had these deals already and they've had this money, and now you're about to close the spigot of these kinds of deals, they're going to say, wait a minute. Why can't I have what I had before? What makes these deals inappropriate now? By what measure are they not valid? Are they illegal? Now, why? What subjectively makes them inappropriate? Let's litigate this.
Yeah, of
Lawsuits
course.
Are up the wazoo, man.
Of course, that's what's going to happen. The only quote solution is one that the schools absolutely do not want, and that's what is unionization. First of all, who do the schools or anyone else negotiate with right now?
Well, the problem right now is that the players have not had any reason to do this, because as long as they just use the legal system, they're winning. They're getting everything they could possibly dream of. They're getting more than they ever dreamed of.
Exactly.
So there's no reason for them. And this was a very interesting discussion that was had on our message board. Actually, we had some of our readers were really chiming in and giving some salient points. You need to have a reason for the players to get on board with that. And maybe 5 years ago, they absolutely would have. right? If they just capitulated at that point and said, okay, you guys, let's have a
Well, they should have. You're right.
Let's have a union for players. Then they would have someone to negotiate with, and they probably would have been able to negotiate a better deal for themselves. That's way past now. So the players are not going to have that until they are being taken advantage of. And right now, the NCAA doesn't have any way to take advantage of them. As far like what I saw this article, the thing that stood out to me is that the NCAA is just saying, screw it. You power conferences can deal with this. So it's not the NCAA they're going to be suing when their CEO decides that the NCAA is like, we're not a part of this anymore, right? There's a CEO, there's a separate clearinghouse, and then the Big 10 or the Big 12 or the ACC, they're going to be responsible for dealing with these problems.
Yeah, I wonder if I don't know if it was you or Seth or Craig who said this. I wonder if if they're doing this knowing it's a patch. Knowing that this is something that they're doing as a stopgap to give the image of a sort of a stopgap measure to say, hey, we're trying to give some framework of guardrails or control that that we're trying to give some order, to bring some order to the chaos, knowing that, hey, we're going to get sued. This is not going to stand, but we're at least trying to bring some balance to deals that we think are not really deals, envisioning a future where we know we're going to have to bring players to the table, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. So until then, there is this. I wonder if that's the case.
There's a degree to which the conferences have different needs, especially the power conferences have different needs. And I'm talking about the commissioners, really, right? When they're coming, because they're the ones who are, it's going to be a conference, this is going to be run by the conference commissioners. When the commissioners are not necessarily looking out for what's best for Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State, right? They're looking out what's best for, they're hearing back from the athletic directors and the presidents of their schools and saying, what do these guys need? And one of the major things that they're concerned about is if you're Indiana, Ohio State and Michigan are going to come poach your players every year, right? Mm-hmm. And and they don't have any way of stopping this. And that's so when what's the information flow, right? What are they being told to get out of this deal? I think at least half of each one of these conferences, even the power conferences, who are the ones paying all this money out, right? The bottom half of those conferences are still saying we need some player security, because we're just getting poached, and it's just going to be Georgia and Alabama and Michigan and Ohio State and Texas, and we're not going to be able to compete in this world.
And this is a good point. And how much do we like a world where it's Michigan, Ohio State, and all the other teams stink, or maybe Penn State?
A lot of people grew up in that world.
I grew up in that world. I'm old enough, and it wasn't great, to be honest.
You mean we as in Michigan? How much do we like? Because I love it.
Okay. I'm not sure that I like it that much. I mean, I'm not sure if I like the rest of the schedule.
Why do you care? Why do you care how Indiana or Purdue is doing? They don't care about how you're doing.
Well, they don't, and they never will. But
exactly.
But it still seems to me that if you have some degree of competition, I want to beat them by 30, not 90.
It only matters. It only really matters that Ohio State is up there, or Penn State is up there. It only matters that the big time teams are big time. The also-rans just need to be there for cannon fodder. Yeah. You just need somebody there to tune you up. And then have the big time marquee teams be marquee teams. The rest of them can get in where they fit in.
What really didn't work was the 4-team playoff era, because there were only 4 or 5 teams in the country that could get you into that you could play for and get into the playoffs until Michigan beat down the door, right? And you had to be and all the 5 stars were going to Georgia and Ohio State, and everybody else were just living in their world, and that really sucked, because it was like that. Why watch the season, right? Now, the one thing I think that nobody really seems to be talking about that they need to protect is everyone needs to still have their schools. Boise State needs to be able to play Idaho. Texas A&M should play Texas. These old rivalries, the old way, like the fact that you can go on Saturday to this, gleaming center of your state and just everyone be together and watch football together. We're in danger of losing that because the money is going to try to make this like the NFL. The money is going to try to say, okay, there's only going to be 16 teams you need to pay attention to, or 12 teams right now with a 12-team playoff, right? 16 teams you got to pay attention to, and nobody else matters. So if you're a Boise State fan, well, I'm sorry, all the players in Idaho are going to go play somewhere else, and you can root for Washington if you want, or you can choose another team on the East Coast, but your team's not going to matter anymore. I think that that's something that no one's really considering, no one's paying attention to, and that's something that's truly good about college sports, which doesn't necessarily make more money, but is a truly important thing about college sports, that no matter where you go in America, you're going to meet someone who's a fan of their college football team. And we could lose that, because if it becomes another professional sport, then you don't have that anymore. Then it's like,
I don't know.
You lose something that was unique about us.
And along those lines, what if the players strike at some point? Even if you have a negotiating unit, the players strike.
They need to form. Then the problem solved, because once you have, once they're labor and they're formed, like, I'm not saying this is a panacea for everything. People, I think this is a misconception that people are having on our message board about what we were talking about. I'm not saying that this is the answer for everything, that the players unionize and be treated as labor. Right. I'm saying that's the one way we've had of working this stuff out before. It's not necessarily the only way. I think the way to do it is legislation. And I think the longer we wait for legislation, the less we're going to get out of the deal. And what I want is a legislation to take care of this, because then they can say, listen, your antitrust things, all these lawsuits, you're protected from that. In return, the people get A, B, C, D, and those things can be things that we really care about. Protecting our conferences, protecting the price of games, or how much they can scalp us for, right? Not letting schools participate in the secondary ticket market. We could put all these things in legislation and say, look, if you want in on this deal, then the people get this. And then we could have a federally protected system of college football that is uniquely American and speaks to our values, because we don't really want to be watching salary caps. We want to watch football.
Do we really think this is going to get prioritized at a federal level, though, to the point where in the near future, this is going to be moved up the food chain and be made law? I think it's going to continue to be at the state level and be a piecemeal type of deal, where you see states like Tennessee step forward and make laws, and Texas make laws, and
it's not going to work. It's not going to work if the states are making their own laws. The states are going to make laws based off of trying to get their teams to be better.
You're exactly right, which is why we're going to have to rely upon the sport. We're gonna have to rely upon the sport. They can't because
we have existing labor laws in the United States, and you're just gonna get sued under those laws.
And so here's where, and this is where a legal question comes in. So I'll ask you this, or Craig, and I'll ask the lawyers in the chat to ponder this question as we head to a break. Is there something short of unionization, player representation short of unionization, where they can congregate, where they can assemble and be represented, have a seat at the table, be represented, and have their interests, be accounted for in rulemaking, have a voice when it comes to enforcement, all the things that we talk about when we talk about them being employees, but not be unionized. Is there some sort of power that they can be assigned and them have a position and have them be represented, and so they can have some sort of protection, and then at the same time have a negotiating power where they can have a side, and then the sport negotiate with them, there be a solution, and have a future where they come to an agreement, that agreement be have a settlement, and then in the future, after that agreement, they not be sued once that agreement, once they have a result of that agreement moving forward. I don't know. As we were having this discussion, I was having this discussion with Ira yesterday, I think it was. We were talking about, hey, if you have representatives from like the power conferences, player representatives from power conferences, and they were to come forward and say, hey, this is what we want. We want to have these type of deals from collectives be okay. You might have some players say they don't agree to that and they could still sue. Is there some way forward in the future where you could have some sort of representation from the players where it wasn't a unionization deal, where that could work and it would protect them from litigation moving forward without it being a unionized, a collective bargaining sort of deal? I don't know if that's possible.
No.
Question for you lawyers to ponder.
It's very simple, Sam. There's no impetus for the players to do that.
Insider on the Big 1050 WTK, online at the big1050.com.
Maybe some smart lawyers out there who do this stuff know more than me, but I say the answer is probably no.
You can't. It's not like I'm sorry, I'm not an attorney, and the attorneys can say like, the attorneys can find their way through anything, maybe. But the basics here are very simple. Okay, the way that they used to do it was they had a Supreme Court case that said student athletes, and student athletes you could treat as a class differently than other people or different than other labor, and they used that for a long time until states came along and changed the laws. States are the ones who had the original. That was what changed where we were, because until then they had the student athlete protection and they could use that. Now you're asking them to make a deal with an entity that doesn't exist and has no reason for existing. The players have no reason to come to the table and collect a bargain because they're standing on a field of victory right now. And every time the NCAA tries to climb the hill, they're going to get knocked down.
Is there a special class that could be created for
legislation?
Federal legislation.
Federal legislation. That's their out. And federal legislation is possible. I can't talk about the current political climate and current political situation, the people involved in that right now. But the possibility of legislation that's real. That's how MLB got out of this problem in the 70s, when they very quickly went from having the reserve clause to not, and having to all of a sudden deal with free agents, and it ballooned salaries very quickly, very out of control. And then they were lucky that there was a players union, and that they were fighting a players union the entire time. And every time they stepped overboard all the way through the 80s, they just got the players union stronger until the point where they had somebody to bargain with on the other side. The players don't even have a reason to make a players union right now. They're winning.
So yeah, if they weren't employees, but if there was a special student athlete employee class, for instance, that they created, specifically for college.
The NCAA can't create that,
right?
Why the federal government can? We can make legislation that says, look, this is a national pastime, and competition is going to create market pressures that don't normally exist in the regular market. So we recognize that this is different. And then what I want them to do, I'm not saying anyone's talking about this, what I want them to do is saying, okay, we're going to give you this. Okay, players are not going to have a choice unless they want to vote for their congressman or whatever. But we're going to give the NCAA X, Y, and Z power to regulate their sport so they can have competitive balance. And then in return, the people are going to get X, Y, Z. And I think that if we want to do that, I don't know the future of politics. I don't know what's going on, but like if we wanted to do that, the people now, the fans now could create that list and say, we'll give the NCAA control over players again, but we want to have certain controls over the shape of college football, right? We want just a limit on 12-team conferences, so they can't have these super conferences and take away the Pac-12 from everybody. These are important things to people all across the country, and I think that if we wanted to create a bill out of this, we could do that, and we could get a piece out of it too, because the fans are side that no one's really talking to in this whole matter, right? They're just assuming, oh, we'll get more money out of them.
I guess my interest for Michigan aren't aligned with the interests of the rest of the programs in the Big Ten. Like I don't see. I see my interest maybe being aligned with the interest of strange enough to say of Penn State and Ohio State, but not as much with the interests of the also-rans.
Yeah,
in the league, right?
So that's been true for ages. Now, sometimes one program gets more powerful than the others, right? There was a period when Ohio State really kind of controlled the Big Ten. There was a period when Craig was young, when Michigan controlled the Big Ten. And there was a period when Chicago controlled the Big Ten. And those things can happen too, where you have like the lowest teams siding with the top team, and then they all make the rules that way.
Yeah,
but
your point about Chicago is lost on most fans, but it's absolutely true. Chicago controlled the conference or the teams to the extent they weren't a conference in the 1890s in particular.
Yeah.
That's the only place teams could make money. So playing in Chicago.
Guys, back on radio in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider on the Big 1050 WTKA, online at thebig1050.com. Folks, before we get back to the MGoBlog Roundtable, I want to let those of you who are in the market for a new vehicle know you should get on board with Brighton Ford. Why? Because Brighton Ford is the ultimate destination for your new car or truck. Head right in and settle into the seat of your favorite vehicle. Get in, take control, and drive off the lot in a car or truck that was meant for you. Go to Brighton Ford, call 1-800-NEW-FORD, or go online at brightonford.com and take advantage of employee pricing. You pay what we pay from now through May 31st. Well-qualified lessees can lease a 2025 Ford Explorer Active for as low as $257 a month with only $3,500 down, plus first payment, taxes, doc fee, title, license, and state fees due at signing. Security deposit waive, 7,500 miles per year, 24-month lease. Call 1-800-NEW-FORD or see dealer for full details. Call 1-800-NEW-FORD today. Employee pricing, you pay what we pay. Brighton Ford, the official Ford sponsor of the Big 1050 WTKA. So, guys, I asked you lawyers before we went to the break, and I know you talked about it during the break to the people in the chat about was there some legal wrangling that could be done to allow for student athletes to organize and to be represented, to have a seat at the table in negotiations with what would be this new commission, and to be able to have a stake, to have a side in talking about rules and NIL. And so now they could be represented moving forward. And then there would be some protection then for college athletics moving forward as well. So when they negotiated with student athletes or these representatives, that when they came to an agreement, that once they made some decisions, that they would be protected from litigation after the fact. And what was said to me in the break was, Craig said, well, probably not. Probably not.
No.
And Craig, you said, well, there, and my response then was, well, could there be a special class that was created, a special employee class for student athletes that was created? And you said through federal legislation.
Right. I mean, that's what Seth said, and I think Seth is correct. I don't. And again, even under federal legislation, you're not 100% clear. In other words, you create federal legislation and someone says, hey, wait a minute. I don't think this is constitutional. I think this violates my rights. There's still potential litigations out of, just because you pass federal law doesn't mean the federal law will automatically pass constitutional muster. So I don't know. I mean, it might, but this isn't easy, in my opinion. But I think Seth is essentially correct that the only way it happens is is federal legislation, and the only way out of federal legislation that you get a voice at the table is unions. Even if you don't want to call it a union, it's basically got to be like a union. And so that's, the future. I suspect how much any of us really like that is, another question. But I think ultimately that's what's going to happen.
Oh yeah, I think that's the basic, fundamental, undeniable truth is that there is no way forward without players having a seat at the table. You cannot govern people without them having a say in how they're governed and not expect for some type of uprising.
Correct.
I mean, that has been the case throughout history. So I mean, this is no different.
They're threading such a fine line with so many factors right now that it's really hard to have this discussion from any standpoint, because there's just so many bumps that we can hit, right? Like the NCAA very badly does not want their athletes to become labor. They don't want them to become employees. So because they're dodging that, they lose a whole lot of power. And that's the difference between like the other pro leagues like the NFL and the MLB, who has a very strong labor union, right? And a very strong the reason why those work the way they work is because they're talking to employees. And we're not talking to employees. They are not an employee class right now. And they've been working very hard to dodge that to the point where they can't even control like whether NIL forces you to be on your own team, right? If we pay Bryce Underwood so much, he's still not forced to play for Michigan because we can't put that into a contract because that would make him an employee. So these are big hurdles to get over. And I don't want to paint a picture like, okay, federal legislation is the panacea, especially because federal legislation can easily get corrupted and turned to something. I'm saying, as fans, the only way for us to have any say at the table is this. This is the leverage that we have right now, that the players don't have any reason to come to the table right now. They have no reason to unionize. They have no reason to do anything but just let this play out because they just keep on getting more. The schools have a major problem with what's going on. They want to get some sort of control. Especially want to have control over their rosters. They want to have control over the money. They don't want to have to like go and beg for money every single year from their donors. So they have a major reason to want to come to the table. So if they can't come to the table with the players right now, they can come to us. And we have a Congress. We have a country with laws and a constitution that we can use to get what we want out of these people.
Yeah, so
that's all I'm saying here.
Here's another undeniable truth. I don't want to make this political discussion, but do you think this is something that would have bipartisan support? Because I tell you what, they're trying to strong arm this commission through. They're saying that if you don't sign, you risk expulsion from whatever league you're a part of. And I'm thinking to myself, so I'm Michigan and I don't sign. You're going to expel Michigan from the Big Ten. You're right. Give me a freaking break. So the power still lies with Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State and Alabama and Florida and Georgia. You're not going to expel any of those teams. You can expel Purdue and Indiana and Northwestern. You can expel those teams, but try expelling any of the teams that the TV contracts are based on. And the networks are going to say, screw you for trying to expel those teams. So it's all about leverage, man. I can't imagine a reality where they go to Michigan and say, sign this or else. So if I'm Michigan, I'm sitting here looking at the contract and saying, if it doesn't meet my terms, I'm not saying. I think the way this thing is going is that it must be Michigan and Ohio State, Alabama and Florida, Penn State, Georgia. They must be kind of dictating what this commission looks like, or else this thing is it must be telling the commissioners what this looks like, or else this is a warped sense of reality that these commissioners are operating under. Because they don't know the way the world is really working if they're going at this the other way, in my opinion.
None of these people are the level of person who even thinks this way. They don't. You're giving foresight and understanding of how to like work these shifting sands to people who were never put in these positions for that kind of ability. These guys they negotiate TV contracts, and that's about the most that they do. I'm talking about conference commissioners, right? And the athletic directors, they're going to be looking out for their own. But these athletic directors, you think Michigan State's athletic director is saying to himself, man, we really need to worry about Michigan and Texas and Alabama and Ohio State destroying the conference system so that they could have their own TV contract and play themselves as like a pro league. They're not thinking that in terms of that. They're thinking, how can I screw Michigan? They're so much further down in the dirt than you're giving them credit for. I don't see anything coming out of these people that's going to make any kind of sense. I think that they're just going to kind of drift along. They're going to just deal with the situations as they come up. They're going to try to get through the House settlement. They're going to try to do this. And like you said, it's a patch, right? The clearinghouse is going to be one more patch. Everyone's going to try to get their thing in it, right? Ohio State's going to try to have some way that they can cheat and no one else can. And Michigan's going to try to have some way where we can pay players as much as we can legally. And Purdue's going to have wants to have some sort of way that we can't steal other cornerbacks every time they find one. That everyone's going to be out for their own good. And then that's going to fall apart, and we'll go to the next thing. I think federal legislation is eventually going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 4 years. So
that gets back to my question. If you can't get sort of uniformity, if you can't get teams and conferences aligned, what makes you think you're going to get bipartisan support at the federal level?
Because there are certain things that we as Americans all want. And one of them is for college football to just be on, right? And like the more we're getting annoyed by the fact we have to go to Peacock for one game and we can ask for things. We can say, look, after 24 hours, every game becomes part of the public realm. If you want to be in this deal, we can ask for that. We could say that every game has to be on one internet network that we can all access for a certain amount. We can say that. We can do things like this. We can grab something out of this if we want to. And I think that if we step back from being Michigan fans for a moment and look at the game and why we love this game so much and why it's so important to us, there are things there that we want. And I'm not saying we're going to get it, but I'm saying federal legislation is the one opportunity that we have when we have some leverage here to get something for ourselves, because we're not part of this conversation right now, and we're not going to be for 4 years.
I gotcha. Well, we shall see. Folks, this thing is moving pretty rapidly. Well, here's what we know. NCAA pretty soon will be no more as an enforcement arm when it comes to intercollegiate athletics. So I'm actually looking forward to that.
So does that mean Hamburger Gate is gone?
It's an interesting question. I think it means the hammer is not coming. We already knew the hammer wasn't coming. We got to get out of here, folks. We'll see you tomorrow here on the Michigan Insider or the Big 1050 WTK online at the big1050.com.
Clear on radio.